Hey Facebook friends, Marianne here, coming to you from Copenhagen, and I wanted to just take a moment because it's something that has really kept coming up during this trip that I completely did not expect. My husband Joshua wanted to see Scandinavia, so we began here in Copenhagen. We went over to Hamburg, and then we kept going on up through Norway, Sweden, and came right back down, and we're back in Copenhagen. And after having been in so many places throughout Scandinavia, of course, one of the most amusing things to me was the prevalence of 7-Elevens everywhere. And I started going into the stores just to see how they're different and neat. And of course, I'm texting Jim, and and he was telling me about just what an amazing job they do here. And I honestly don't know if there were any 7-Elevens in Scandinavia while my dad was alive. I have no idea about that. But what really struck me was something that I asked my father in the last years of his life. And I asked him, like, what are you proudest of? And one of the things that he talked about was what in the United States we talk about equal opportunity employer. And what that meant was that someone didn't have to speak the language, the prevalent language of a nation, in this case English, 100%, that they didn't have to have had a long history of living in the country. Essentially, 7-Eleven is willing to be the first job for immigrants. And that by making it equal opportunity, they weren't going to automatically refuse someone who had just moved to the country as a potential employee. And over the years since my father passed away, I have met so many people from every race you can imagine, from all over the world, and many of them have become self-made, multimillionaires. Others have just, created a really solid middle-class family, for themselves. And each time I've talked to them, they tell me about how everything began when they had absolutely nothing, and they came to the United States and no one would hire them, and then 7-Eleven would hire them, and it began their journey into everything that is the American dream. But what we talk about in the United States as the American dream is really the dream of people around the world, which is an opportunity to improve upon your life, an opportunity to build that quality of life into something different and unique that reflects your own personal values, an opportunity to create opportunity for future generations, an opportunity to not only create a sustainable life for yourself, but to create a life in which you enrich yourself, experience things, and it doesn't mean extreme wealth. It means maybe you could take some time off and drive over to see a different city. Maybe you could go with your significant other and go out to dinner sometime. These things that a lot of people think about, whether it's going out for Chinese or hamburger or whatever, is actually considered major luxuries from some of the countries that immigrants are coming in from. And, the luxury to have freedom. And let me say that phrase again, the luxury to have freedom. That is probably the definition of happiness for so many people in the world. Well, anyway, getting to meet more and more of these people, and I've just been blown away and really come to understand at a deeper level what my father meant by equal opportunity employer. And of course, he didn't use the term conscious capitalism. John Mackey had that term, and he was, for those that don't know, he was the founder of Whole Foods. And the idea is that capitalism can be a force for good if used consciously with ethics. Social responsible investing, really putting people, planet, equal to, profit in terms of what you do. Well, all these different things, my father came from a line in which my grandfather fought to make profit sharing legal. It used to be considered illegal. So these things, I would argue, and have argued in a lot of my presentations around the world, that those are actually forms of conscious capitalism, even though they didn't call it that. Profit sharing is conscious capitalism, and equal opportunity employer is conscious capitalism. But, there's a part of me when I go, little me that came from, Mexico and would have been living in a third world situation. Not that Mexico's a third world country, but there are third world situations in it. And that's what my lot would have been, and how my life was so dramatically transformed by being adopted by my parents, Deborah and John Thompson. It makes me very aware of the privileges that being an American has given. And one of those things is the equal opportunity employer. And that is something that was written as legislation in the United States, but it was something that the private sector had to come in and say, we're going to do this, we're going to exemplify that. And I don't know who the senators were that drafted that. All I know is that my father, when he was CEO of 7-Eleven, and my uncles, when they were executives of 7-Eleven, they were the first in the United States to say, we are going to do that. Well, I knew about that legacy in the United States. I had no idea about the impact that it was having in the country until as I got older, I started seeing how, like in Mexico, when they extended it, it allowed people to form a middle class when they could own 7-Elevens. As I got older, I've seen people who had a series of 7-Elevens and later parlayed that into other things. And now I've met, as I mentioned before, multimillionaires. But what I had no idea was how 7-Eleven took that, and I'm going to give a lot of credit of this to Jim Keyes, although my father probably had influence over that because they were very close, and Jim was his protege. But I had no idea how the concept and the value system of equal opportunity employment as something that 7-Eleven has taken with them all over the place. And being here in Scandinavia, I have seen people that are from India, from multiple Muslim countries. I've seen people from Latin America. I've seen people from the continent of Africa, multiple countries, too many to name, that are all working in 7-Eleven. And obviously, they're beginning to learn the Norwegian language. Obviously, some of them are beginning to learn English and are at various stages of learning it. And it's very evident that this is one of their first jobs in the country. And I'm realizing that the idea of equal opportunity employer was something that may have begun because of a forward-thinking senator in the United States, and may have begun because someone like my father stepped up and said, yes, I'm going to take that challenge and commit my company's values to it. But to know that that commitment is something that has now branched out and is affecting people's lives in multiple countries is something that is just absolutely astounding to me. And it's one thing, as Joshua and I were talking about the other day, walking around in countries I've never been in, and a few that I think my dad may have never been. I don't know if he ever been to Norway. I don't think he did. But walking in countries that I know my grandfather certainly never went in, and seeing that there are 7-Elevens that are set up in, these places, and quite often on a corner, and I know my grandfather and my dad were always like, put it on the corner. And to know that this is actually something that they dreamed of, and that this dream has been adapted by people around the world, and that now with equal opportunity employment, it is uplifting people around the world. That is something that I think my father and my grandfather never ever dreamed would happen. So that is something that's touched me deeply as we've gone through Scandinavia, and I'm so grateful. So I don't know anyone that owns 7-Eleven stores, in Scandinavia, but if this ever reaches them, I just want you to know from the family that began 7-Eleven, it means a lot to know that those value systems are still there and being embraced and are still being used to positively uplift lives. So thank you, because in this world where there's so many challenges, when we see someone taking an opportunity to uplift and lives by the choices they make when it comes to how they manage their companies, it demonstrates how capitalism can be used as a force for good. And it's not going anywhere. And I know there are many people that say, oh, capitalism is evil, but it's a tool. And as many of you have heard me say, you can use a hammer to kill someone or to build something. It's not the hammer, it's evil. So to see an instrument of capitalism being used in such a positive way is a challenge for all of us, whatever we're doing in the world, to do the same. So anyway, just wanted to share those thoughts with you, and my best to all of you, and can't wait to know more about what you're doing and hear your feedback.